Okay, so after a record-breaking 40-day government shutdown, we're finally seeing a glimmer of hope out of Washington. But the big question is this a real fix, or are we just kicking the can down the road? Let's break down the deal that could finally end this stalemate.
First things first, let's just let that number sink in. 40 days. That's the number that has defined this entire story. 40 days of political gridlock, shuttered services, and just a whole lot of uncertainty for millions of people.
And to be clear, this wasn't just another funding gap. No. This standoff officially went into the record books. It became the longest government shutdown ever in the United States, stretching way beyond any we've seen before.
So, that brings us to the question on everyone's mind. Is it actually over? Well, a recent breakthrough suggests the answer might be yes. Let's walk through what's in this deal that's supposed to end the whole thing.
Okay, let's get into it. The first real sign of progress, the first crack in the ice, came from the Senate, and it happened after what was obviously a pretty intense weekend of back-and-forth negotiations.
Now, this procedural vote might sound a little dry, but it's absolutely crucial. You can think of it as the green light. After a month of basically nothing, this vote was the signal that lawmakers were finally ready to sit down and actually hash out a solution.
So, what's actually in this bill? What's the secret sauce that managed to break the deadlock? Well, it turns out the compromise is a really careful mix of immediate relief and some promises for the future.
When you really look at it, the deal is kind of structured in two parts. On one hand, you've got the immediate fixes, a temporary funding bill to get the government's lights back on, and really importantly, a guarantee that all those federal workers will get their back pay. But on the other hand, you have future promises, like securing funding for essential programs down the line. So it basically solves the immediate crisis while pushing some of the tougher fights to another day.
But hey, this is Washington we're talking about, right? So of course, this deal didn't happen without some major political drama. In fact, it actually created a pretty big rift, especially inside the Democratic Party.
Let's do a little bit of Senate math here. To get anything major done, you need to beat something called a filibuster. And to do that, you need a supermajority of 60 votes. Well, Republicans only had 53 seats, so they just couldn't do it by themselves. They absolutely had to get some Democrats to cross the aisle.
And this is exactly how they got to that magic number. While most Democrats voted no on the deal, a small but really decisive group of 8 senators broke from their party and voted with the Republicans. That was just enough to squeak by that 60-vote threshold and finally break the stalemate.
But yeah, Democratic leadership was not thrilled. The Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, voted against it. He basically argued that his party gave up its biggest bargaining chip, the shutdown itself, without getting a solid, locked-in guarantee on their top priority, which was extending healthcare subsidies.
And if you think that was tough, the criticism from outside the Senate was even sharper. California's Governor Gavin Newsom had just one word for it: pathetic. And that really just goes to show you the deep frustration and division this compromise sparked among Democrats.
Now, beyond all the politics and the back and forth in Washington, it's so important to remember the real-world cost of this 40-day shutdown. We're talking about the impact on actual, everyday people.
The most direct hit was on 1.4 million federal workers. These are people who were either told to stay home or in some cases had to keep working without any idea when their next paycheck was coming. I mean, that is a massive financial strain on families all across the country.
And the impact went even wider than that. The shutdown put food benefits for 41 million low-income Americans at risk. To put that in perspective, that's about 1 out of every 8 people in the entire country who rely on the SNAP program to eat. And the ripple effects were felt just about everywhere. We heard threats that U.S. flights could be reduced to a trickle, and it disrupted a huge range of government services that we all rely on every day. It just shows how deeply woven federal operations are into our daily lives.
So look, while that Senate vote was a huge step, the government isn't officially open for business just yet. There are still a few more hoops to jump through before this whole thing is really over.
Here's the road ahead. After a bit more debate, the bill has to pass a final vote in the House of Representatives. And who knows, it could hit some snags there. If it clears the House, it then lands on the president's desk to be signed into law. Only then, after all 3 steps, is the shutdown officially over.
But, and this is a really big but, here's the catch. This is a temporary fix. This deal is what's called a continuing resolution, which is basically a short-term spending patch. It only funds the government until January 30th. That means this exact same political fight could flare right back up in just a few weeks.
And that leaves us with the big, multi-billion-dollar question hanging over this whole saga, doesn't it? Was this a genuine moment of bipartisan problem-solving, something we can maybe learn from? Or did lawmakers just hit the snooze button on a crisis, delaying the inevitable next showdown? I guess we're all going to find out soon enough.